Loud noises. Loud noises. In this video, I'm going to be going over Earth Household by Gary Snyder, and I want to say up front that this was a really interesting book for me to read. This was definitely outside of my, normal reading, the types of nonfiction I generally read. But I also think that that's important, and that reading a wide range can be really helpful as far as expanding horizons, introducing new ideas. And this caught my eye originally. I believe it was an article from Maria Popova, Marginalian, and she had mentioned the book. It caught my eye, and I dove into it, and I'll talk some more about why and how and all of that, but let's just get going with that. I'm Adam Moody, and looking forward to sharing some thoughts and insights, a little bit of an overview on Earth Household with you. So let's just get into it. As I mentioned, the author is Gary Snyder. I did not know anything about him before this book. He is a Pulitzer Prize winner and is associated with kind of the beat poets back in the 40s, 50s, that time frame, just to give you a little bit of context if you're not at all familiar with him or any of his writing. So the big idea, kind of my thoughts behind this, and taking a little bit of what I've seen, he said, it's basically what Gary observed and lived during a very 10-ish year stretch spanning the northern Cascade Mountains of Washington State in the U.S., to Japan, India, and more. So in this, he's discussing nature, its journal entries, its essays, it's his observations about human nature, Zen Buddhism, the thought and practice of it, the practical applications, and kind of the future, a little bit of humanity and communal living, interspersed again with some interesting essays and thoughts, which we'll get into. So I didn't do a full chapter breakdown, but this covers most of it. And so at the beginning, I'm sorry, I got this out of order slightly. So starting with basically a journal while he's a lookout in the northern Cascade Mountains of Washington. And this really hit home for me and helped draw me in, I think, as I've been up in the northern Cascades, hiking, trail running, backpacking. And it is really interesting to hear this. And even if you're not from that exact area or have that experience in the area, I think hearing about this and some of the funny anecdotes, or maybe they're not so funny, but I don't want to spoil it, but his thoughts on people and how they're acting in nature, and what they're doing to it. I'll talk some more about that, but I don't want to give you an exact quote from it. After that, his trip going over to Japan, there's notes, there's observations of monastery life, and then another chapter on kind of the practice and the intensity of it. I believe it's a week, or it was a 2-week long, pretty intense practice, but it's really interesting. It gives the background, and this is in the 50s, of what's going on, and how it works, who's involved, how do the masters deal with the students? Are normal people permitted in? They are. How it all works. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting observation, as well as some of the things he does while he's in Japan. And I may have this one mixed up, but in terms of order, but he has a review of Native American focused books, and it's his reviews, and talking about them. I believe there's 2 or 3 of these, and you come across them and you're like, wait, what is this? Like, oh, he's reviewing books, and he has a lot of knowledge in this area, and it's interesting to read. And some of these I would like to go and check out. A lot of interesting references in this book. Life on a ship. So he, after Japan, takes on crew, or rather he is taken on his crew on a ship, and then he has a chapter of the life of a former, I believe it's a Zen master, and so that's an essay. He has a journey to Rishikesh and Hardwar in India, and what goes on there, who he's traveling with, some interesting people from history. Again, if you're familiar with Beat Poetry Times, you'll recognize some names, and the background on some of the masters there, the practices there, and it's an interesting I guess, juxtaposition with both his life in the United States and the practices in Japan. It has a section, Buddhism and the Coming Revolution, and how he thinks this is going to really change things or what could happen. Then we're going back to the Northern Cascades in Washington State and the Glacier Peaks Wilderness, and summiting Glacier Peak with Allen Ginsberg. So, very interesting chapter. And I apologize for how small this is getting, but Passage to More Than India is the name of the chapter, and he's discussing the tribe. Free living, communal living, who the people are at the time of him writing this, and how they, he starts it out how they recognize each other, and brief excursions about historical figures that live this and what this means, and who these people are, and that there's more than people think, things like that. Why the tribe? So he kind of goes further into this idea and what's happening now in terms of back then when he's writing this. So there's definitely some interesting thoughts on communal living and how things could be improved, and I've got, again, more thoughts on this. Just want to expose you to the general ideas on this, but it's interesting, again, if nothing else, for me to see from the perspective at that time in the 1950s. And then a few ending chapters that kind of go all over. We've got poetry, society, yoga, meditation's role in society. And then the final chapter to me was also very interesting, working and living on a small southern Japanese island. The focus, the lifestyle that went on there to live almost, not, I wouldn't say being forced to live in line with nature, but you're on a very small island, and, of course, like, you can't over farm and ruin the land, and how the people did it, and talks about the lifestyle there and how they did things, which was a very interesting end of the book. So some big thoughts and ideas. I mentioned this a little bit, but it was published in 1969, the earliest entry at the very beginning of the book from his Northern Cascades time, and when he's working at a watch post, as early as June 1952. And I, personally, as I mentioned, I really enjoyed this, the chapters in the Northern Cascades, and it had me laughing, and not necessarily in a good way. But he's talking about how gross people are, and how they're destroying the environment. This is 75 years ago. And, some of the same arguments and the angers we have, I couldn't help but laugh because I've been in that spot, and, was thinking like, well, I guess we do what we can. The upsides now is maybe you don't see as many like tin cans, but you still go backpacking, you come across people who clearly had a fire and left behind packaged goods and trash and metal scraps and stuff, and it's terrible. But it's amusing in a horrible way that it's the same stuff that he was looking at and seeing. So one of his thoughts, again, these are just the highlights that I picked out of things that really caught my eye. It's the idea about discipline. And I think that this is really fascinating, and I'm going to read what he wrote. Unfortunately, I think this attitude or this thought could be twisted into kind of a YOLO or do whatever you want because that's the truest thing. But at its core, when done right, I think it makes sense. So what he said was, discipline of self-restraint is an easy one. It's clear-cut, it's negative, and it's based on some accepted cultural values. Okay? Discipline of following desires, of always knowing what you want to do, is hardest. It presupposes self-knowledge of motives, a careful balance of free action, and sense of where the cultural taboos lay, knowing whether a particular desire is instinctive, cultural, personal, a product of thought, contemplation, or the unconscious. So that one really caught my eye and definitely saved that, and I think it deserves a lot of thought, and especially in the context of our own lives and what that means. I think he would agree too that self-restraint is important, and clearly he's not saying it's not, but discipline of following desires and knowing what you want to do is hard, because if you're really being true to yourself and not just saying, well, I want to be, I want to have the most money. Like, okay, that's not maybe the real desire. What is it you want? And can you be honest with yourself? Do you want power? Do you want recognition? Do you need to feel that you're important? Like, what is it? And finding the real things that matter to you and then following that path is incredibly difficult. So again, that just really caught my eye. And interspersed in this book are lots of pieces like this, and I'm sure there's other things that would stick out more to you or to somebody else reading the book, and part of the fun was coming across these. And then another strong reminder of why meditation can be important. And for me, this was interesting. Again, a lot of this is the perspective just coming from this long ago, that this was 70 plus years ago. So taken out of a paragraph where he's talking about meditation, but the practice of meditation for which one needs only the ground beneath one's feet. And it wipes out mountains of junk being pumped into the mind by the mass media and supermarket universities. Sounds like could have been written pretty recently. So again, that struck home, liked that. And then a good reminder of why doing things the harder way can make sense. I think that this is great. This is an amazing quote. A hand pushing a button may wield great power, but that hand will never learn what a hand can do. Unused capacities go sour. I think that is fantastic. And, pushing a button, doing things, automating is important. It leads to fantastic outcomes. But there's something to be said for doing things the hard way, whether that's you're writing a journal, whether you're taking notes and rewriting them to help yourself learn by multimodal learning, whether you're getting out and doing the work, you're training as an athlete, whatever that is, hard work can pay off and have some great benefit. So love that quote. Overall, I guess one of the more, I wouldn't call it a negative takeaway, but the way I feel, and I think it's, again, looking back through history, is that it's a little over-optimistic, and that, meditation and living in line with nature is going to help the entire world and bring about a revolution and a change. And I can say I don't think that happened. Maybe it did, and I'm not aware of it. But I think it hasn't been able to conquer human nature and some of our more negative qualities. And that's not to say that you can't personally embrace these and make yourself a better person, or try to make the world a better place by making yourself better, which I think is also important. But looking back, it is kind of tough to see this and be like, I don't know if, this means the same thing in this time period. But going back again, I've also pointed out the similarities where it's like, we can take some of this and take the bits that I think are important or that work well for us now. I guess take the best and leave the rest. Cool. So a little bit of a summary and an overview. This is not what I would call an easy read, and I've seen other people say this about Earth Household, is that if they're not familiar, they don't know what they're getting into, it can come across as a little bit jumbled. But remembering it's really his notes, some essays, and put together, and when viewed as that, to me it makes a lot more sense. And there's certainly some parts that I had a harder time reading, but time and time again, I found myself picking up the book and over a few days and finished it really quickly. During the work week, I think I finished over the period of a few days, and it really just kept drawing me back in. Also, while Zen Buddhism had definitely been taught in the United States, I believe it was introduced sometime in the late 1800s. Gary Snyder and other beat poets and writers really helped to kind of popularize or at least expand knowledge about this. So I think that, some of the historical references that he makes as far as Buddhist masters, teachers, writers, could be good jumping off points. I'm certainly interested in a couple of the things he mentions, and I think that this could be, if you read this book, that there could be some good pointing in directions where you could kind of do some further research and going back to some of the more fundamentals or the originators of some of this information in the United States. And I've talked about this a bunch, but I think that, just seeing the world through someone else's eyes and in that time frame, and doing some of these incredible journeys, whether it's his time on the boat and talking about the characters he's working on this ship with, seeing different Zen Buddhism practices and things I haven't had experience with, or again, the Cascade, seeing the mountains through his eyes and his experiences, in the 1950s is just incredible. So I think that if you enjoy that idea, if you want to expose yourself to something new, or you're familiar with these ideas and you want to see it through his frame, that you should definitely check this book out. Well, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave it on the video and I will get back to you.